Every day we wake up with choices: hit snooze or get up, scroll mindlessly or focus, react or respond, and in those tiny, often invisible moments lies the greatest power we possess: discipline. Most people think of discipline as punishment, but neuroscience shows us something different. Discipline isn't about suffering, it's about freedom. The freedom to act in alignment with our goals rather than our impulses. Today, I want to show you how discipline isn't just a habit. It's not a trait some people are born with. It's a skill, and it's a superpower that anyone can train. And when you learn how to harness it, you change your brain, your behavior, and ultimately your destiny. The foundation of discipline begins in the brain, not in motivation, not in routine, but in the neural architecture that governs your behavior. At the center of this architecture lies the prefrontal cortex, the most evolutionarily advanced part of the human brain. It's located right behind your forehead and is responsible for functions like planning, decision-making, impulse control, and focus. When we talk about discipline, we're actually talking about the ability of the prefrontal cortex to regulate the more primitive emotional parts of the brain, particularly the limbic system, which craves immediate gratification and avoidance of discomfort. In neuroscience, we refer to this as top-down control, the ability of the higher brain to override the lower brain. This is not something you're born with in full form. In fact, the prefrontal cortex continues developing well into your mid-20s, and it can be trained and strengthened throughout life. The idea that some people are naturally disciplined while others aren't is a myth. What looks like innate discipline is usually the result of consistent training the brain to favor long-term rewards over short-term temptations. Every time you make a disciplined choice, whether it's resisting the urge to check your phone, choosing to study instead of procrastinate, or waking up early to exercise, you're not just making a behavioral decision, you're strengthening a circuit in your brain. Neurons that fire together, wire together. This principle of neuroplasticity means the more often you engage the prefrontal cortex to override an impulse, the easier it becomes the next time. You're literally reshaping your brain to become more disciplined. It's important to understand that these circuits are built through repetition, not intensity. You don't need a heroic act of self-control once in a while. What you need is repeated engagement in small acts of discipline. Over time, this repeated activation builds stronger and faster connections between the prefrontal cortex and the rest of the brain, especially the limbic areas responsible for emotion and desire. What used to feel like a struggle begins to feel automatic. What was once effortful becomes effortless. That is the biological basis of what people call willpower. There's another layer to this, and it's about attention. The prefrontal cortex doesn't just regulate impulses, it also governs attention. Discipline isn't just about what you avoid, it's about what you attend to. If your attention is constantly hijacked by novelty, noise, and endless notifications, your brain becomes wired for distraction. But if you deliberately train your attention through mindfulness, focus blocks, or deep work, you're teaching your brain to value sustained effort over fleeting pleasure. That's the neurochemical foundation of discipline. What this means is that discipline isn't a battle of character. It's not about moral superiority or punishment. It's about training the brain in the same way you would train a muscle. The brain is plastic. It changes in response to how we use it. If we use it to delay gratification, to focus, to resist the easy path, it begins to favor those pathways. That's not philosophy. It's biology. So if you've ever believed you're just not a disciplined person, understand that you've been running a program, not living out a truth. And the incredible part is programs can be rewritten. Circuits can be restructured. Discipline isn't something you either have or don't have. It's something you build, one neural connection at a time. One of the most misunderstood ideas about discipline is the belief that you need to feel motivated before you take action. That you need a surge of energy, clarity, or inspiration to begin. But this is not how the human brain actually works. In reality, motivation is not the cause of action. It is often the result of it. Neuroscience shows us that emotion follows behavior more than we realize. If you sit around waiting for motivation to magically appear, you may be waiting a very long time. But if you take even a small step forward, the brain begins to respond in a fundamentally different way. This is largely due to the way the neurotransmitter dopamine functions. Dopamine is commonly referred to as the molecule of pleasure, but that's an oversimplification. Dopamine's real role is in motivation, reward prediction, and movement toward goals. When you anticipate something rewarding, dopamine is released to drive you forward. Interestingly, the greatest dopamine spikes don't occur when you achieve a goal. They occur in the pursuit of it. Your brain releases more dopamine during the process than at the finish line. That means the action itself creates the motivation, not the other way around. So when you take that first step, whether it's putting on your running shoes, opening the laptop to begin working, or simply standing up to face the day, your brain registers this as movement toward a goal. It starts to release dopamine, which in turn gives you more energy, more focus, and a stronger sense of purpose. This is the beginning of a feedback loop. Action leads to dopamine. Dopamine reinforces the action. The action becomes easier next time. What began as a forced behavior slowly becomes a natural part of your identity. This is also why habits are so powerful. A habit is essentially a behavior that has been reinforced so many times that it becomes automatic. The first few repetitions are always the hardest, not because the task is so difficult, but because you haven't yet trained the brain to associate that behavior with a reward. Once the brain begins to predict a dopamine payoff from the action, even if it's just a small feeling of progress or completion, it becomes more likely to initiate that behavior again. The more frequently you act, the more predictable the dopamine becomes, and the easier it is to stay consistent. A lot of people misunderstand this and think that they need to wait for a big meaningful goal to feel motivated. But the science tells us that small wins are incredibly powerful. Completing a simple task, checking something off a list, or making a little progress each day all generate a sense of accomplishment that the brain registers as reward. You don't need to climb the entire mountain to feel good. You just need to take the next step. The brain will reward forward movement, and that reward will make the next step easier. Even on days when you feel resistance, when you feel stuck or fatigued, the act of initiating behavior, just getting started, flips a switch in the brain. There's a concept in psychology known as behavioral activation, which is used to treat depression. Patients are encouraged to engage in positive actions before they feel like doing them. The surprising result, mood improves after action, not before. This principle applies to all of us. You don't wait for energy to move. You move and then energy follows. This is why people who are highly disciplined often don't look for motivation. They rely on routines that begin with action. They've learned that once they start, the internal state changes. Once they lean into discomfort, momentum builds. And once the momentum is there, discipline becomes easier to sustain. It's not magic, it's neurobiology. If you want to become more disciplined, don't ask yourself how to stay motivated. Ask yourself what small action you can take right now. Don't wait for your feelings to align. Train your brain to understand that action comes first, and feeling will follow. That is one of the most powerful shifts you can make, and it rewires the way you approach everything. Because once you stop needing to feel like it, and you start moving anyway, you're no longer a slave to your mood. You become the author of your behavior, and that is the beginning of real power. One of the biggest misconceptions about discipline is that it's purely a matter of inner strength, that if you just had enough willpower, you could overcome distractions, resist temptations, and push through discomfort. But modern neuroscience and behavioral psychology paint a very different picture. It turns out that willpower is a limited resource. It fatigues over time, and if your environment is constantly working against you, even the strongest-willed person will eventually fail. The truth is, your environment plays a far bigger role in shaping your behavior than most people realize. It can either support your discipline or sabotage it. What surrounds you, physically, digitally, and socially, is continuously influencing what you pay attention to, how much effort something requires, and what decisions feel easier or harder. If your phone is constantly buzzing with notifications, if your workspace is cluttered and chaotic, if unhealthy snacks are within arm's reach while nutritious food is hidden away, your brain is being nudged in the direction of distraction and indulgence all day long. And these nudges matter, because the brain evolved to conserve energy. It favors the path of least resistance. So whatever is easiest, whatever is closest, whatever is most obvious, that's what your brain is more likely to choose. What this means is that the disciplined person is not someone with superhuman willpower. They're someone who designs their environment to reduce the need for willpower in the first place. They make the desired behavior the easiest option, and the undesired one more difficult. This is called choice architecture, and it's one of the most effective tools for creating lasting change. For example, placing your phone in another room while working doesn't just reduce distractions, it changes the default setting of your attention. It removes the decision fatigue of resisting the urge to check it every few minutes. That one environmental shift frees up mental energy you can use elsewhere. Another powerful concept here is friction, the amount of effort it takes to start or stop a behavior. By decreasing friction on good habits and increasing friction on bad ones, you can dramatically shift the trajectory of your day without relying on brute force. Let's say you want to exercise in the morning. If your workout clothes are buried in a drawer and your gym shoes are somewhere under the bed, you've introduced unnecessary friction. But if you set your clothes out the night before and put your shoes right by the door, you're making it easier to follow through. Your environment is preloading your decision. On the flip side, if you want to reduce mindless scrolling, you can log out of social media apps, delete them from your home screen, or even use grayscale mode to make them less appealing. These aren't acts of willpower, they're acts of design. It's also crucial to understand the social environment you're in. The people around you influence your behavior in powerful, often subconscious ways. If you surround yourself with people who are constantly making excuses, who complain more than they act, or who default to instant gratification, their mindset begins to seep into yours. But if you spend time around people who hold themselves to high standards, who value growth and effort, and who practice consistency, that energy is contagious. Your brain is wired for social mimicry. You become like those you spend time with. So choosing your tribe is not just a social decision, it's a neurological one. Another overlooked aspect of environment is how much control you give your tools. Digital environments, your phone, computer, apps, are designed to capture your attention, not protect your focus. Every time you open your phone with the intention of checking one thing and end up spiraling into 20 minutes of unconscious scrolling, that's not a lack of discipline. That's an environment engineered for distraction. The solution isn't to try harder, it's to rewire your digital space to support your values. Turn off non-essential notifications, use apps that block access during deep work, make distraction inconvenient and focus convenient. Ultimately, discipline becomes much easier when the path to your goals is smooth and the path to distraction is rough. That doesn't mean you won't face challenges. You will, but the energy you save by creating a supportive environment allows you to focus your willpower where it truly matters. Because willpower should be a backup system, not your main operating system. When your surroundings are aligned with your intentions, your behavior becomes more consistent, not because you're forcing it, but because it becomes the natural next step. This is the secret many high-performing individuals understand, whether consciously or unconsciously. They don't wake up every day wrestling with temptation. They've set up systems and spaces that carry them toward their goals with less resistance. And you can do the same. You don't have to be stronger. You have to be smarter about what you allow into your space, your schedule, and your mind. Because in the end, the most disciplined people are often the ones who have to use discipline the least, not because they need it less, but because they've built a world that helps them thrive. Discipline is often portrayed as a relentless, unbreakable force, something that should operate at full power every hour of the day. But that's not how the human brain or body functions. Just like a muscle, discipline can be trained and strengthened, but it also fatigues. And if you don't understand how that fatigue works, if you ignore the biology behind it, you'll eventually burn out, lose consistency, and even begin to feel like you're failing at something that once felt possible. The reality is that discipline is not infinite. It's a limited resource that ebbs and flows based on how well you manage your physical and mental energy. The brain consumes a disproportionate amount of energy compared to the rest of the body. Even though it only makes up about 2% of your total body weight, it uses about 20% of your energy at rest. And when you're engaging in tasks that require focus, decision-making, emotional regulation, or resisting impulses, all of which are functions of discipline, the energy demand increases. That means every time you exert self-control, you're drawing from a biological reservoir. That reservoir is not fixed. It's heavily influenced by factors like sleep, nutrition, light exposure, stress levels, and even your breathing patterns. Sleep, for instance, is not just about resting your body. It's the foundation of cognitive control. When you're sleep deprived, the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the rest of the brain weakens. That means your ability to make thoughtful decisions, suppress urges, and stay focused diminishes significantly. You may still want to be disciplined, but the machinery required to execute discipline is impaired. Studies have shown that even one night of poor sleep reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex and increases reactivity in the amygdala, the brain's emotional center. In that state, you're more likely to be impulsive, distracted, and reactive. So when you think you've lost willpower, what you've actually lost is access to the part of the brain that governs willpower. The same principle applies to nutrition. Your brain runs primarily on glucose, and stable blood sugar levels are essential for sustained cognitive performance. Skipping meals, eating highly processed foods, or going long periods without proper fuel can create energy crashes that undermine your ability to regulate behavior. It's not about obsessing over diet, it's about understanding that your brain's ability to exert discipline is directly linked to how well it's being fueled. And hydration plays a role too. Even mild dehydration has been shown to impair focus and increase fatigue, two conditions that make disciplined action more difficult. Another key piece of this puzzle is light exposure, especially in the morning. Natural sunlight in the early hours of the day helps set your circadian rhythm, the internal clock that governs alertness, hormone release, and energy levels. When you get bright light in your eyes within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking, your brain receives a strong signal that it's time to be alert. This boosts cortisol in a healthy way, increases dopamine tone throughout the day, and promotes better sleep at night, all of which contribute to your ability to stay consistent and disciplined. Without this environmental cue, your body clock can drift, leading to irregular sleep, low energy, and poor cognitive function. Beyond the basics of biology, there's also the concept of recovery. Just as an athlete needs to rest after intense training, your brain needs rest after extended periods of focus and self-control. This doesn't necessarily mean doing nothing. Recovery can be active, a walk in nature, a quiet meditation, a meaningful conversation. The key is to downshift from a high cognitive demand state to one that allows your nervous system to reset. When you ignore this need for recovery, when you push through fatigue day after day without giving your brain space to restore itself, you enter a state of chronic stress. Cortisol levels remain elevated, sleep quality declines, and mental clarity erodes. Suddenly, the disciplined behaviors that once felt achievable now feel impossible. Breathwork and deliberate relaxation techniques also play a crucial role in maintaining discipline over the long term. When you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, your body's rest and digest mode, you allow the brain to shift out of fight or flight reactivity. This shift enhances your ability to reflect, plan, and respond calmly to challenges rather than react impulsively. In other words, the more balanced your nervous system is, the more accessible your discipline becomes. You're not constantly fighting your biology, you're working with it. So often people interpret dips in discipline as a personal weakness. But more often than not, it's a sign of biological overload or depletion. The system is fatigued, not broken. And when you begin to see discipline as a cycle, exertion followed by recovery, intensity balanced with restoration, you start to treat it like the living dynamic process it truly is. You stop chasing constant output and start building sustainable performance. This understanding leads to a powerful realization: taking care of your body is not separate from being disciplined. It is the foundation of it. Sleep is not optional. Nutrition is not optional. Light, rest, and recovery are not optional. They are part of the protocol for maintaining your ability to direct your actions toward meaningful goals. When you prioritize these things, you're not being soft, you're being strategic. You're protecting the instrument through which all discipline is executed, your brain. And so if you truly want to build lasting discipline, don't just look at what you're doing. Look at how you're supporting the system that makes it possible. Because discipline is not about running at full speed until you collapse. It's about learning how to train, push, rest, and return stronger each time. There is a quiet but profound truth at the heart of discipline that many people overlook. The most powerful form of discipline is not rigid or harsh. It's not about punishing yourself or running from failure. It's about building a relationship with yourself that is rooted in self-respect and long-term vision. And that relationship is only possible when you cultivate patience and compassion for your own journey. Discipline isn't just about forcing outcomes. It's about guiding yourself with enough consistency and care that growth becomes inevitable, not explosive. It's the slow, deliberate shaping of character, not the frantic sprint to perfection. In a culture that rewards speed and glorifies overnight success, patience almost feels like a weakness. We want immediate transformation. We want rapid results. We want to feel like something is working within days or weeks, and when we don't, we start to doubt ourselves. But real change, the kind of change that is sustainable and deep, doesn't happen in bursts. It happens in layers. And every layer takes time. Discipline is what keeps you moving through those layers when the surface shows no signs of progress. It's what holds your commitment steady while the results are still invisible. This is where compassion comes in. Most people think of discipline and compassion as opposites. One is hard, the other soft. One demands, the other forgives. But that's a false dichotomy. True discipline requires compassion, because without it, you're only creating a system of self-punishment. You'll start to treat your mistakes as evidence that you're flawed or incapable. You'll internalize failure instead of learning from it. And over time, that mindset corrodes your motivation, your self-trust, and your desire to try again. But when you bring compassion into the process, every failure becomes part of the lesson, not the end of the story. Think about it this way: no one learns a skill without stumbling. A child learning to walk falls hundreds of times, but we don't judge them. We encourage them, support them, and celebrate every wobbly step forward. That same principle applies to building discipline. You will slip, you will miss days, you will make choices that go against your values. But those moments don't define your discipline. Your response to them does. If you can return to your path without shame, with curiosity instead of criticism, you reinforce the behavior loop in a positive way. You train your brain to understand that setbacks are survivable, and that progress is still possible. One of the most powerful mechanisms in the brain that supports this is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience. When you approach your efforts with patience and persistence, even small repetitions begin to create new neural pathways. Over time, those pathways strengthen. Behavior becomes more automatic. What once felt difficult becomes familiar. But this process doesn't respond well to panic or harsh self-judgment. In fact, stress and self-criticism activate areas of the brain that reduce learning and plasticity. They put you in survival mode, where the brain is focused on protection, not growth. Compassion, on the other hand, creates a neurochemical environment that supports learning and adaptation. It calms the nervous system, restores cognitive flexibility, and increases motivation over the long run. There's also a hormonal layer to this process. Chronic self-judgment and impatience lead to elevated cortisol levels, the primary stress hormone, which disrupts sleep, impairs memory, and drains energy. Over time, this state of stress fatigue reduces your ability to stay consistent. But when you practice patience, when you allow yourself to be in the process rather than trying to rush it, you create space for your physiology to support your goals. You sleep better, you recover faster, you're more emotionally regulated. These aren't just nice side effects. They're essential components of sustainable discipline. What all of this means is that the voice you use with yourself matters. If your internal dialogue is filled with harsh criticism, your discipline becomes something you have to endure. But if that voice is one of firm yet kind guidance, if it speaks like a coach who believes in you, your discipline becomes something you're drawn to. You begin to associate effort with growth, not punishment. You start showing up for yourself not out of fear of failure, but out of respect for who you're becoming. And perhaps the most important shift that happens when you bring patience and compassion into discipline is this: you stop tying your worth to your performance. You start seeing discipline not as something that defines your value, but as something that reflects your values. You realize that you're not building habits to prove anything to anyone. You're building them because you care about your life, because you care about what you're capable of, because you believe that your time on this planet matters, and how you spend it should be aligned with what you value most deeply. This is not soft thinking, it's strategic, because a disciplined life fueled by compassion is far more resilient than one fueled by fear or shame. It can weather setbacks, it can recover from missteps, it has the patience to see goals through to the end, not because it rushes to the finish line, but because it trusts the process. That kind of discipline lasts. That kind of discipline transforms. And that kind of discipline, rooted in patience, elevated by compassion, is not just powerful, it's unshakable.